Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Jordan. I'm the mom of 4, and I normally make videos about my life as a mom and some systems and routines that we use in our house to keep us afloat. But today's video is going to be just a little bit different. Today I want to talk about something that has been on my mind and something that I've seen on the internet lately that kind of rubs me the wrong way. So I want to show a new perspective from it. But today we are going to talk about my birth story from my first child. And I'm going to put a trigger warning here because this birth story is on the traumatic side. And I don't want to scare any moms away from wanting to be moms or from giving birth. This is just what happened to me, and I'll tell you why I want to share it in just a second. If you don't think you can handle hearing a traumatic birth story, go ahead and click out. Take care of yourself. This video is not for you. So lately I have seen, and I know that this is not a new conversation, but I've seen this conversation floating around that I absolutely hate. And it is whether or not having a C-section is giving birth. I've seen so many comments on TikTok and Facebook about you didn't give birth, you had your baby cut out of you. And if that is your mindset, I would love for you to watch this video because maybe I think that you need to see it from the perspective of somebody who actually has had a C-section and why I had to have a C-section. I think oftentimes people don't understand that it was not my choice to have a C-section. It was something that I had to do, or else I was not going to survive my pregnancy. Have you guys ever seen Gilmore Girls and the episode where Rory's dad's girlfriend is having a baby and she's like, oh no, I scheduled my C-section for next week because I just don't have time for this. I feel like that is how some people view having a C-section, is that when moms choose to have a C-section for whatever reason, it was out of convenience, not out of necessity. So I do want to tell the story of my very necessary emergency C-section just to give those people a little bit of perspective on what happened to me and what can happen and has happened to other women around the world. It's not likely that a woman chose to have her first C-section. It was often out of necessity. And I know, I get it, that there are people who disagree with what deems a C-section necessary. But honestly, if you're not a doctor, I do not care what you think. So I want to get started by talking about my first pregnancy. I was 21 when I got pregnant with my oldest child, and yeah, I was young. I was 21. Things were going great. My pregnancy was going smoothly. I couldn't eat mozzarella sticks because the baby didn't like that. But other than that, things were going great. And I went to my 32-week appointment at my OBGYN, and they saw something concerning. They had told me that they had seen protein in my urine sample, which is one of the symptoms that can come up if you have preeclampsia. Now, when they saw this, they tested my blood pressure. My blood pressure was totally fine. So they told me that they were going to have me come back in a couple of days just to monitor my blood pressure. So my first appointment, the 32-week appointment, was on a Monday. So they had me come back on Wednesday. On Wednesday, there was still the proteins in my urine sample, and it was a little bit more elevated than it was the time before, and my blood pressure was unusually high for me. It wasn't bad, it wasn't dangerous. It was just I had previously had really low blood pressure, and it was about at a normal stage. So they were like, that's a little bit elevated for you, so we want you to come back on Saturday. Unfortunately, the doctor's office is closed on Saturday, so they told me to go to the hospital and have a non-stress test done on Saturday, just to kind of monitor my blood pressure and make sure that it wasn't rising too quickly. Now, when I was 21, I had a job. I was working then, because I was only pregnant with my first child. I wasn't a stay-at-home mom yet. And I was an event planner for this company. And on Saturday was one of our big buyouts of the year. We had a company who had rented out the entire park and spent a lot of money to have an event for their employees. And it was my job to be there. So I was a little bit nervous, but I told my boss that I would go into the hospital, have this non-stress test done in the morning, and that I would be back by the time the group was supposed to check in. I didn't make it back. And I was worried about that. I was stressed about work. So when I got to the hospital and they checked my blood pressure, it was extremely high. And so they decided that they were gonna just keep me for a little while, monitor me for a few hours, see if I became less stressed, and then my blood pressure would maybe go down so that then I would be okay. So they monitor me for a few hours, and it doesn't look like it's changing. I had, of course, called my boss, who was very understanding. She completely was take care of yourself kind of lady. So I wasn't super stressed about work anymore. I had been laying down for hours and my blood pressure just kept rising. So they tried to call my doctor, who unfortunately, and this is not his fault, nobody blames him, but he was on a camping trip whenever this happened, which just my luck, right? Like I said, not his fault, but just my luck that the doctor that I had chosen and trusted would be out of town the day that I'm having a medical emergency. And so they called in this on-call doctor, and I did not care for her. From the moment things started, she was no, there was nothing wrong with her. She was just she spoke in a lot of medical terms. And as someone who was a 21-year-old first-time mom who had never been to medical school, what she was saying was going right over my head. And every time I would ask her to re-explain it, she would just explain things the exact same way. So her and I were just button heads from the beginning. And she was stressing me out. We ended up having, I think, 4 different ultrasounds that day. They were looking for, she would tell me that they were looking for a spike in my baby's heart rate. But she wouldn't tell me why they were looking for that. I didn't understand why they wanted his heart rate to spike. And it wasn't doing that. She was concerned, so they were going to admit me into the hospital overnight. At that point, I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I was so confused. I didn't understand what was going on with me. I didn't understand what was going on with my baby. I was, like I said, completely lost. I had no idea what was going on. And I couldn't get anybody to explain it to me in a way that I would understand. Fortunately for me, this was This was one of the greatest moments of that entire day. Late that night, my doctor, who was supposed to be on his vacation, walked through the door. Now, I don't know if he came home early or if he was supposed to be coming home at that time, but he was coming home from his camping trip. He had cell service and got the message that I was in the hospital and came straight to the hospital. The man was not even in scrubs. And he came to talk to me, and when I tell you I have never been so happy to see a person in my entire life, I was never so happy to see a person in my entire life. He came through the door, and I told him, I was like, I have no idea what is going on. And having known me, having had a doctor-patient relationship with me over the last 7 months, and just, I think, his personality type, he was able to come in and explain to me exactly what was going on. And I'm going to explain it the way he explained it. Remember that I am not a doctor. I have never been to medical school. I have never been to nursing school. I have no idea. The only information I have is the information that was given to me at the time that I was lying in the hospital. But this is the way he explained it to me. When you have preeclampsia and you are swelling, your entire body is just swelling. I'm going to have to put a picture of what I looked like after I gave birth to my son. I'll put it right here. But you'll see I was swollen. A part of you that also swells is your placenta. And the way that the placenta works is there are 2 sets of veins or vessels, maybe I should do some research, that go through your placenta. There's one from the mother and one from the baby. And those vessels are so close together that they can transmit nutrients from mom to baby. That's how the placenta works. When your placenta starts to swell, it creates space in between those vessels and they become narrower, making it harder to transmit the nutrients from mom to baby. So they were concerned that my baby was not getting nutrients and they weren't seeing the fluctuation in his heart rate the way that you would in a normal heart rate, because your heart rate changes and fluctuates throughout the day. They weren't seeing that in him, so he was very melancholy. They were worried that he was losing nutrients, that he didn't have any energy, and that was a bad sign. So he explains this to me. He says, your blood pressure's high. It's manageable. We're going to try and keep the baby in until at least 34 weeks. He told me that the difference between the 33-week and the 34-week baby it's huge. But also that a difference from a 32-week to a 33-week baby, also huge. He said that the baby's development at those stages was it's incredible that they developed so quickly in those last few weeks. So they were going to try and keep the baby into 34 weeks. But they were also going to give me the steroid shot that helps progress their lungs, the baby's lungs. They were going to start. When you get those, I've had that for 3 of my babies. And when you get them, it's a series of 2 shots. You get 1. And then I think it's 24 or 48 hours later, you get another one. But they gave me the first round of that. And then he told me, you get some sleep, I'll get some sleep. We'll revisit this in the morning. And I did. I fell asleep. And at about 4 a.m., I was woken up by the nurse. And she told me, she said, you're going to need to be awake and alert in just a few minutes. So I was like, okay. She woke me and my husband, and I could hear the 2 doctors, the lady who had been there with us the entire time, and my doctor, and they were discussing in the hallway what they were going to do. And so that I got a little bit stressed, and they came in and they explained to me that things were getting bad. It was looking really bad, and they didn't want to wait anymore. What they couldn't decide was, because I was at this particular hospital, and this particular hospital did not have a NICU that was equipped for a 33-week-old baby, they were going to have to transport the baby somehow to a different hospital. What they couldn't decide was whether they would have the emergency C-section done here at the hospital I was at, and then the baby be transported by himself to the hospital with the stronger NICU, or if they were going to transport both of us to that hospital and then have the emergency C-section there. Because of how early it was in my pregnancy and how high my blood pressure was, they did not want to induce me because they didn't want to add any extra stress onto the baby. They weren't sure that he would survive a vaginal birth, because that is a little bit stressful on the baby. So they wanted to do an emergency C-section. They just weren't sure where to do it. They needed to discuss just a little bit longer. So they go back out into the hall, they're discussing things, and they come back in, and my doctor said, and he asked me, he's like, would you be okay with this? And I told him that I trusted him to make a decision that he felt would get me and my baby both out of this situation alive. But he came to me and he said that he felt, honestly, the best way out of the situation was to do the emergency C-section as quickly as possible, which would mean that we would do it in the hospital I was currently in, and then life flight the baby to the other hospital with the advanced NICU. And as scared as that made me, like I said, I trusted my doctor to get me and the baby out of this situation, both alive, and I trusted that he would know what he was doing. So they prepped me for my C-section, and then the nurse was like, okay, and now we have to wait. And I was like, wait for what? Like I said, 21 and naive, and she told me, she said that they had to wait for the helicopter. And unfortunately for me, the helicopter pad was literally right outside my window. So when it arrived, we heard it. And I always refer to that as the moment my life completely changed. I'm sorry. But we heard it land, and as soon as we heard it, they were like, okay, and they walked us down to the OR. So we're in the OR, and I have this pediatrician, and she is looking at me, and we had this pediatrician in the room with us. She wasn't the pediatrician we had picked out. I don't even think we had picked out a pediatrician yet. But she was one that was close by the hospital, and they'd called her to be there whenever he was born. And she was telling me, it's going to go fast, and they're going to take the baby out. And I have to take him into that other room and get him checked out and get him hooked up so that he can then take his adventure on the helicopter. She said, but I want you to be able to see him before I do that. So, because we don't know what kind of condition he'll come out in, we don't know if you'll be able to see him before he leaves. She's like, I want you to see him. So she's like, I want you to keep your head turned this way, and I'm going to run him by just like this so that you get to see him. And that's exactly what she did. And I don't think that is like a core memory of mine, is watching her run my little tiny baby boy past us. And my husband was able to go with her and check him out and take pictures of his first few moments. And then luckily he was born in great condition. He was breathing almost entirely on his own, and other than being really small, he was really healthy. So we were actually able to spend about 30 minutes with him after he was born, before they took him on his little adventure to the NICU. But then I had to stay in that hospital for 4 days, separated from my baby. And then he spent about 5 weeks in the hospital, in the NICU, after being born. And I hated myself for a long time. I wondered, I cried every day for over a year, wondering why, wondering how thinking I failed my son, thinking my body failed me. Why wasn't I would see pictures of my friends having babies on Facebook, and I would wonder, why didn't I get that experience? Why didn't I get that beautiful, wonderful experience? And it was hard for me. I felt like I failed. I remember the day that I decided that I wasn't going to think of myself as a failure anymore. And I had been watching on Facebook. This nurse in our area was doing Facebook Lives for one of our local hospitals, and people could submit questions and she would talk about them and stuff like that. I found it very interesting. And I remember her saying something about, somebody had asked a question about a C-section and it being the worst case scenario. And I could tell she felt very passionate about this topic, because she said, a C-section is not the worst case scenario. She went on to explain that it was a wonderful medical advancement that saves lives. Because worst case scenario used to be before they had the technology of a C-section or a successful C-section, when their worst case scenario and the best that they could do was make the mother comfortable until she passed. And it hit me in that moment that would have been me. I wouldn't have made it past 21 if we didn't have this beautiful, wonderful medical advancement that saved my life, and it saved my baby's life. Because I would have died there at 21 and I would have taken my son with me. But luckily we have this technology of C-sections and doctors who know what they're doing, and we were both able to be saved. We are both here today. My son turns 9 this year. And I couldn't be more grateful for it now. But when I hear people say that it's not giving birth, as somebody who has both had C-sections as well as I have had a VBAC, I can honestly say that one is not superior to the other. And I think that saying things like a C-section is not birth is one of the most harmful things you can say to a mother who's had one. Because chances are she didn't want to be there. Chances are that's not how she planned it. She didn't plan it to fit into her schedule. Chances are it was something that she had to do or felt she needed to do to keep her and her baby alive. And then planned C-sections after that. There are so many risks that come with a VBAC. And not every woman is willing to take those risks. and not every woman can take those risks. So if you are one of those people who believes that having a C-section does not count as giving birth, before you vocalize that to anybody, let alone a mother who has indeed had a C-section, I want you to consider the fact that your words hurt. And not only do those words hurt, but they hurt someone who's already hurting. I am all for being an advocate for education and knowing that you have a choice in the hospital, but the reality is that some of us didn't have a choice. Some of us weren't forced into it by our doctors, but forced into it by our health. If you haven't been in that situation, you can't tell somebody else that it's wrong. Those mothers have done everything they could to keep themselves and their children safe. And if you are one of those mothers who has had a C-section and who's hearing this on the internet or wherever, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. And I think you are an awesome mom because you chose to do what you felt was gonna save you and your child. Not everyone is blessed with many choices or a birth plan that goes to plan. And that's okay. You are awesome and you are an amazing mother. And I'm proud of you. Thank you guys for listening to my story and for listening to me as I rant on my little soapbox about how we need to support mothers who have had C-sections. It is something that I'm passionate about. I think that you do need to support all mothers regardless of whether they have a home birth, a medicated birth, an unmedicated hospital birth, a C-section, whatever. They are all just trying to bring their babies into the world as safely as possible. Like I said, I normally create more content that is more along the lines of my life as a mother, which I guess this kind of falls into. So if you want to see that some more, then follow along, subscribe to this channel. I also do short videos here as well as on TikTok if you would like to follow us there. And if you want to follow my family life a little more, I share that mostly on Instagram and Facebook. And all of those links will be down in the bottom. Thank you guys so much for watching and so much for taking the time to hear my story. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you have the best day.